Well, hello and welcome. Welcome along to But We All Shine On. I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Paolo Hewitt. How are you, sir?
I'm very well indeed. Always good to see you. You okay?
I'm very well. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh. I'm going to be kind of facilitating the conversation together with Paolo. How excited are you about our guest?
I think it's great. I'm really, really pleased we got him. Really pleased.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Our very first guest for our very first episode of But We All Shine On is Dr. Jim Goddard. And by the way, just so as you're clear, not the medical kind, apparently.
Absolutely.
I want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
Want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Goddard is the chair, I think, of the Care Leavers Association. So that's super, super interesting to us. And we're going to have a conversation, as we plan to do as we go forward with these, about meeting people that have had a care experience. Paolo and I are both care experienced. Paolo's written a book called But We All Shine On. And I was thinking, when I was starting talking about, let's suggest some titles for this podcast, I got a note back going, it's going to be called But We All Shine On. Okay, then. I thought I gave some good suggestions, by the way.
Well, yeah.
That's all right. We're okay.
It's a good title, though.
It's a good title.
I like it.
And of course, funny enough, I was out working, talking to somebody recently, and I said, we're doing this new podcast called But We All Shine On. And the guy stopped and he went, great Lennon lyric. And I went, is that where it's coming from? Okay. Oh, yes, great. Great Lennon lyric. So he was very pleased to tell me about that.
And that's John Lennon, not the Russian Lennon.
I thought it was Aaron Lennon.
Aaron
I thought it was Aaron Lennon, late
Lennon.
of this parish. Jim, thank you very much for being with us. It's an absolute pleasure. What we'd like to do, if you don't mind, and let's let it be what it is, as organic as possible. This is a podcast for people that have literally had the care experience, and I know there's going to be very varying experiences for the people we're going to talk to, but you have a care story, I think. Are you comfortable to tell us a little bit about that and let us just sort of see what it takes?
Sure. I'll give you the kind of bare outlines, and then you can
sure.
dip in wherever you want to, if you want more detail. I went into care when I was 3, so it was quite young, and that was in 1966. And back then, as well as you'll probably know, there was still a lot of very big institutions.
Yeah, sure.
So I was in care with my brother. In fact, I was in care throughout the entire care experience with my brother. And we went into care because our mother was mentally ill. She went straight into a mental hospital when I was 3. And those were the days when fathers didn't really take over. My father was a docker, so he couldn't really quit his job anyway. So that was the option, going to care. And we were, for 3.5 years, we were in children's homes in Liverpool. And they were the big old institutions run by Roman Catholic nuns. There was 3 different ones.
Which do you remember the order?
I don't remember the order because I only remember the last one. But I've got my care files, so I've got all the details of when we were. And there were. I think the first one was called
Vincent de Paul.
No. Sorry, the second one was Nazareth House. The first one was
No way, you were in Nazareth House?
In Liverpool, yeah.
All right, so there's a Nazareth House in London, in Hammersmith, which is connected to the Catholic Crusade of Rescue, where I was brought up. So I was raised in the Crusade of Rescue, and it was the Sisters of Charity and Vincent de Paul, I think, were the nuns that where we were in. But I was in North London.
Yeah, well, it may have been the same in Liverpool, but I know. I mean, I always refer to, because the Nazareth houses all over the place.
Yeah, for sure.
I refer to them as the McDonald's of the care system because they were like everywhere. If you go into Google,
and the food was rubbish as well, by the way.
Unfortunately, I don't remember.
They're not sponsoring this, are they? Okay, let's move on.
But if you went into Google and keyed Nazareth House and you had a map of England, you'd have about 12, 13 different places pop up.
Yeah.
Most of them are old people's homes now. But the one I actually do remember, was the final one, which was called St Gabriel's Knoll Park, which was in a very leafy suburb of Liverpool, a posh part of Liverpool. In fact, funnily enough, it was on the same road as Strawberry Field.
Oh, okay.
And the Strawberry Field Children's Home, which obviously inspired the song, is
so
at one end.
You were on the same road as Lennon's house then? Because Lennon was next to Strawberry Field.
Yeah, he lived quite by, didn't he?
Yeah.
But St Gabriel's is at one end of Beaconsfield Road, and Strawberry Field is at the other end.
Okay. Did you ever mix with Strawberry Fields?
No, I didn't know. I only found this out when I grew up, and I went back to explore the place.
Yeah.
You didn't know there was an orphanage there?
No, all I knew was the one I was in. I mean, I was very small at the time, so the one I was in, yeah, that was it. That was our world, apart from going to school.
That's incredible. Help me with, just before we get more into the story, help me with language, because it's interesting. I always say orphanage. Other people say children's home. Other people say care experience. Is there a correct way to position this these days?
I don't know if there's a correct way, but I would always refer to them as children's homes.
Really?
In the sense that obviously most of the children, well, almost all of the children there are not actually really orphans. They still have parents. So
Yeah,
if
that's
you
a
want,
good
you know,
distinction.
we always refer to them as children's homes.
That's why I call it an orphanage.
Yeah, I
'Cause
used
I don't have parents.
well, I
that's
used to
interesting.
call it orphanage until I when I was writing the looked after. That's why I called it looked after kid, because
Oh, yeah, I wondered about that.
well, I was writing it at the time. Then I read this article in the Independent that Gordon Brown, who was then Chancellor, was going to give £1,000 to every 18-year-old who was leaving care. And the article referred to them as looked after kids, which I thought, wow, yeah, I was looked after. I had a roof over my head and they gave me food, but was I really looked after? There's a double edge to it, I think.
Well, the term "looked after" came out. I think I'm right in saying it came after the 1989 Children Act, because of course then there was children in care. That was the common term.
Right, children in care.
And for some, there was a reason, but "looked after" became the modern term, if you like, for children in care.
Right.
But today it's more care experience.
What was
isn't it?
That's more for
Sorry, pal,
people
that's
who've been in care. So the care
Yeah.
experience title
It's past tense.
It's
is kind of it's past tense. So it's referring to people who were in care, and it replaced care leavers. We still have the care leavers
Because you're the
association.
Care Leavers Association, aren't you?
But some people would prefer care leavers. Some people prefer care experienced. So it's just one of those.
Really?
The care experience title is quite a new one.
Okay.
Back in your children's home, was it a harsh routine, or was it? How was it for you?
Well, I
The
always
third one,
say that the time with the nuns
Yeah.
was actually okay.
Right.
It was an institution, so there was not a lot of personal care.
No.
But it was it was what it was.
Yeah.
But in 1969, my brother and I were moved back to Birkenhead, which is where I'm from, and we were put in what was called the family group home. And you probably remember they were quite trendy in the 50s and 60s and 70s, because they were seen as the future,
Right.
because they were like normal houses, like council houses. So you only had about 6 or 7 kids in them at most.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to try and replicate family life. So social services thought they were doing us a favour by putting us into a family, not a family, but it was a children's home run by staff, but it was more like a family setting. But actually, the woman who ran the home shouldn't have been allowed to look after children.
Right,
She was
right,
just
right,
horrible.
horrible.
I was happier with the nuns if I
Yeah.
look back.
In what
Right,
way
yeah.
can you? I mean, I had a foster mother who should
Well,
never have been allowed to look after children. As well.
She wasn't a foster parent as such, although it was similar. She was paid to run a children's home.
Yeah.
A lot of
She
these
ran
small
the
homes.
house. Yeah, she ran the house.
And she was, I suppose the best way of putting it is she was randomly violent and randomly lost her temper. So you never felt safe
Yeah.
with her around.
Yeah.
And there was the first 3 years, I'd say she was strict and oppressive. And then we moved home from one housing estate, the Woodchurch estate in Liverpool, to the Noctorum estate. It wasn't very far. And after that move, she just became worse and worse.
Did you? Sorry, was your brother older or younger?
He's a year older.
So was he protecting you? Were you looking out for each other when this was going off? Or was
No, not really. I think we were all in this. We all felt in the same boat. There was a kind of a core group of 4 boys, myself and my brother and 2 other brothers,
Yeah.
and then the other 2 spaces in the home could change periodically. Like you get a couple of girls came in for a few years, then they went, somebody else came in, and so on. So the core number was 6, and there was a core group of 4 with the others just coming and going.
Mm.
Yeah.
How many were in Nazareth House when you were in the with the nuns?
I don't know about Nazareth House, but certainly in Knoll Park, from
Knoll
my
Park.
memory, roughly, there would have been about 50, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
Could have
How
been
many
more.
staff?
Sorry?
How many staff?
Oh, I don't know. But I mean, there seems to be a fair number of nuns running around. So it's all very vague, when you're that age. You just
Yeah.
remember. But one of the things I do remember about Knoll Park, which I did like, was that we had lovely grounds.
Yeah.
Gardens. I mean, a lot of these old homes, they did have beautiful
Yeah.
grounds.
I
You go out
know.
and play.
I'd say
And,
I can't remember what book it was, but the fact was that, I lived in a home which was donated by the Bentley family, right? They owned the home in the 20s, the guys,
Yeah.
the car people.
Oh, right.
So it's a 6-bedroom house, right, with a huge sitting room and a huge playroom and a huge dining room, and then a huge garden outside to play
Yeah.
football in. And then but we were kind of the lowest of the low. But then I'd go around to my mate's house, who all lived in council houses. I think, God, it's really small in here, isn't it?
That's
And I was
interesting,
living
isn't
in this sort of, like you say, this.
In luxury?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of those homes around, weren't there? Like the kind of sort of slightly in the countryside and quite large.
Yeah. Hidden away, I always
Hidden
find.
away, yeah.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is one of the things that I think really affects us. That the children's home is never part of the town. The bingo hall, the football club, the pub
Yeah.
is part of the town, but the children's home never is it? Because it's hidden
No.
away.
No, well, I mean, the idea of the
interesting.
family group home was that
Yeah.
it would be,
Yeah.
because it was literally on in a council estate on the same street.
Yeah.
But the woman who ran the home was not keen on us mixing with the local kids, and nor with the neighbours. So we were still very isolated, even though we
Yeah.
were actually literally in the middle of a council house estate.
Yeah.
So tell me about I mean, you, by all means, please tell more about the care experience if you want to. But what happens when you leave care? You move from the big house with the 50, you move into the smaller family unit. Did you stay in care up until the end, up until you were 17, 18, or what happened?
Yes and no. I was very, very lucky. What happened was, this was about 1980. The local authority decided they were going to close the home.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother had just gone to university, and they gave me an option. They said, look, you're still 17, we don't want to kick you out or anything. You can go into a foster home, we'll find you a foster home, or you can go back and live with your dad. And we still kept a relationship with our father. My brother and I would go there every Saturday. I mean, he didn't do much. He used to just basically get us some comics and watch the horse racing on telly.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say he was that engaged, but it was a safety valve, if you like. Anyway, at 17, they said, choose. So I just chose to go and live with my father, because I knew that I could look after myself, really. And he was a known quantity.
Yeah.
I wasn't going somewhere where I didn't know people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a big
Yeah.
difference.
Could you
doesn't it?
talk to your dad about what you were going through? Dad, there's this woman and she's beating us, and could you
No.
tell him? You couldn't do it, right?
No, it was.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't say it was a taboo subject, but I never felt supported enough by him. He was very, very indifferent. I suppose what I would say when I moved home is that he didn't make me feel welcome, but he didn't make me feel unwelcome either.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, compared to the home and compared to when the woman ran it, it was a lot better. But I have to say, and this is quite important about the kids' home I was in, that when the woman who ran it left, they got some new staff in. She left when I was just before I turned 16, and for the final year and a half I was in the home, it was lovely.
Yeah.
The new staff. I mean, one staff had been there. A woman had been there. Pauline had been there for years, and she was really good. She'd always been really good and supportive to the kids. But that final year and a half were quite liberating. I could go and
Yeah.
do things and go to
Interesting.
gigs and all sorts of things that
Yeah, that you couldn't
teenagers
before.
want to do.
Did you have a social worker? Would you have social workers?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
could you talk to them about it? Because I had one and I couldn't. But
Only near the end. I think what happened, and it's all a bit vague, but I think social services cottoned on, from what I've heard, to what this woman was like, really
Right.
like, and I think they pushed her out.
right.
Okay.
And I remember having a conversation with one of my social workers. I would have been about 15, and it's in my file. It's written up in my file, and he'd asked me what it was like, and it was. He just said that Jim clearly doesn't get on very well with the woman who ran the home. So it was the first time he'd spoken to me, I think, on my own. And the first time I'd had the courage to at least say I didn't like her. I didn't go into details, but I just indicated I didn't
Yeah,
like
yeah,
her.
yeah.
Tell you what.
But
It's
she
hard
was
to
given-
articulate it, isn't it?
It is hard.
It's
yeah.
really hard to
Well,
articulate.
you worry about who's it going to get back to. I
Yeah.
know a couple of kids I was in care with, they did say what was going on, got back to the woman. So
It's very interesting, isn't it? When you
Yeah.
think today, when we think today about some of the cases that are being live today, and sort of Me Too, and just and whatever other things, whatever other examples you want, the notion of voice for people in care now, or for young people, or people just generally, is different. But no one reported anything, did they? I mean, the abuse that we saw, nobody, who's going to believe you anyway?
Yeah.
There's nothing, nobody's doing it. I don't want to leapfrog too much of your story, but I'm intrigued because you become something of a historian about the care experience, haven't you? You've been doing quite a lot of research and historical kind of archaeological digging around from about 1945 onwards as well. I understand.
That's my current book
That's
project. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit of the history of care. I'd be interested to know what you've learned, what you've discovered, and why you were interested as well.
I think my interest has grown over the last 20 years. It's a bit of I wouldn't say it's an obsession. Well, no, it is an obsession.
Yeah,
I'll be honest,
obsession's
it is
good.
an obsession. And I just like to find out more and more about what went on in the past. And I'll go around the UK and other countries as well and find these old children's homes. The buildings of which still exist, the big old institutions. But the 1945 period, obviously, one of my main reasons for doing it is that it's our generations. Even the people who were in care in 1945, particularly the infants, they're still alive, most of them.
Yeah.
So it's the history of people who were still there and their families and their children. And people have got grandparents who were in these institutions. So it is history. But it's a history that's relevant to people who are still here, who are still with us.
One of the things that I'm quite interested in, Jim, is, you did really well academically, haven't you? How did that, when I was in the children's home, doing homework or stuff like that was always a bit, I could read, I was a good reader and that, but it was always a bit difficult. It wasn't like I was being encouraged to do it and whatever. How was that experience for you? Because you went to university and did incredibly well.
By the way, I'm still reeling from that. But when Jim said his brother went to university,
Yeah.
was it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
How many people out of care go to
Which is
university?
very-
I've never heard of it.
I know, very rare in those days, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Really
You're
rare.
not kidding.
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
Well, in my brother's case, he got to a grammar school at 11,
Okay.
and the woman who ran the home, although she was horrible, she insisted that we do our homework every night. She was very rigid about stuff
interesting.
like that. And I quite liked school. Was a bit of an escape. It was
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Oh, that's
And
good.
did you
Yeah.
find, see, for me, books were the escape? Was that the same for you?
Actually, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just school books. It was. I liked the subjects, but I also liked just reading generally. It wasn't. It was an escape, as you say. It was
Yeah.
an outlet, really.
Yeah, I used to read Greek literature, so
Yeah.
I was over with
did?
Hercules. Oh God, I was with Hercules.
Yeah.
I was in the Trojan horse, man. That's me coming out, first one out.
Oh, quite. That's
Yeah.
quite highbrow stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. But that's what I found, that these things, for me, it was music, football, and books that because it put you in the present. When I was doing it, I wasn't worried. When I'm Hercules or when I'm playing football or listening to music, I'm not worried about. I'm not getting those feelings of depression or lack of self-confidence.
Is it an escapism?
Absolute escapism.
Yeah. I
So-
think.
And I'm just wondering
yeah.
if how much of that was for your academic career. Buried your nose in books.
It was a form of escape. I mean, my favourite places to go were libraries.
Right. Yeah.
I've got a massive affection for Birkenhead Central Library, for
Right.
example. Even
Really?
now, it was just
That's brilliant.
if I could choose to go, if I've had a free day, that's where I go.
right.
And
And-
just lose yourself in it.
Just but it was kind of hiding, but it was
Yeah.
hiding in a nice way.
Yeah.
Tell
yeah.
us more about the history work that you do. What are you discovering?
Well, some of it's already been done, but the last history book only runs up until the late 70s. So I'm kind of going up, not quite the present day. The 1940s period is really, really important. There was a report which you may have heard of, Paolo, the Curtis Report,
Yes.
in 1940, published in 46, I think it was, 45, 46, and it was an investigation of the care system, and it was the first major investigation exclusively focused on children in care. And there was a woman involved called Marjorie Allen, who is just the most wonderful, wonderful person. And she was actually a landscape gardener, and she was quite a senior figure, or connected to a senior figure in the Labour Party, so she had quite good political links. And she just came across these children in care because she was doing nursery work during the war. And she tracked down why these kids looked so different and so unhappy. And she was like a kind of dog with a bone, really. She just kept investigating what was going on in these children's homes. And she wrote there's a famous letter she wrote to the Times newspaper. And she planned it out quite cleverly. And that letter generated a massive correspondence which ran on for 2 months. and generated quite a lot of publicity. She badgered MPs in the House of Commons to ask questions about these kids' homes. And in the end, an inquiry was instituted into the general state of children's homes in the UK. And most children at that point, well, England and Wales, Scotland had its own system. Most children in England and Wales certainly were in children's homes. They weren't in foster care, in families. And a lot of them were in voluntary homes. But there was quite a lot of local authority, big children's homes as well. And anyway, the outcome of that was the Curtis Report. The outcome of the Curtis Report was something, the 1948 Children Act,
Mm-hmm.
which introduced a new system, which lasted from from 1950 roughly until 1970, 72.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the period which will have affected all of us. And it was when they had things called children's committees
Mm-hmm.
and children's officers within local authorities.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was the
we used to
system.
have one. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a Freemason.
Yeah, and then from roughly the early 70s onwards, we had the modern social services department.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm tracing that history pretty much decade by decade, the 40s, the 50s, 60s, and so on.
What university did you go to?
University of East Anglia, Norwich.
Did you, when you were at university, so how old were you then? 18?
18.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you tell anyone about being in care? Like if you were in a social situation having a drink, you did?
Well, no, not because throughout my school period, the early secondary school period, eventually I did tell people because I couldn't avoid it. I basically lied.
Yeah.
I'd just pretend I had a family.
Right.
I didn't really make it up, but if I was asked, I'd avoid saying it about my care experience.
Yeah.
So when I got to university, I carried on doing that. I'd avoid admitting that I'd been in care.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember, because I had a best friend called Chris. He's still my best friend now. And at the end of the first year, I'd moved into another house off campus. I thought, this can't go any longer. I've got to tell him. And I remember confessing to him, and I summoned up my courage. I wouldn't say it's like coming out, because I don't know what coming out is like, but it kind of felt like it was a bit like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a confession that I'd been brought up in children's homes.
Yeah.
And it was very, very nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it must have been about 10, 15 minutes, he was just very chilled about it.
Yeah.
What was the concern? What was this? What?
Did you feel shame about it?
I don't know whether the word shame attaches to it. I'm not sure shame's the right word, but I was incredibly nerve-wracked about it.
Yeah, because
I think it was more. I didn't fear rejection particularly. It was exposing something about myself.
it made you vulnerable.
I suppose so. Yeah, it's very. I don't really know why I felt that level of anxiety. I just knew that it just felt very difficult.
Do you know, one of the things I found interesting, Jim, is when I've talked to people who have care experience, there's something really interesting to me about, and I was asking you before about the children's home versus the orphanage, and I think part of that, I wonder if part of that has to do with, so I'm an orphan, right? I don't know who my mother or father is. So to me, if you ask me where I come from, I don't come from anywhere. I'll tell you I'm an orphan. Because I don't have anything that I feel I need to honour and protect, right? So I don't have your story is one where you were in care because your mother had a breakdown, and your father, well, in those days, fathers didn't look after children. And I sometimes wonder whether there's such an instinct in children, even children that have experienced a level of rejection or whatever language you want to use, that we still wouldn't want to be dishonouring about saying, because you know your parents, right? Whereas to me, I don't. So I'm like, whatever. And I watch people be very circumspect and careful about disclosing their care background when they know their parents. That's just an observation. I don't know if it's true of you, but I've seen it so many times, and I think it's very interesting.
I wouldn't say it's true in my case, but I do agree with you. I mean, I think, and it's quite understandable that even people who come from often quite abusive backgrounds and have gone into care, they can still be quite protective of their parents.
Fascinating, isn't it? It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes, it wasn't an accusation for you. I was just curious because you said it, and I thought, I hear this. This I hear frequently.
When you were at university, did you like, did you suffer as I did from what they call now imposter syndrome? Did you keep thinking, I shouldn't be here, or did you feel in a different way?
I wouldn't say it was anything explicit.
Right.
I didn't. I mean, to me, when I was at university, I saw things in class terms. It was very odd. I saw myself as a working class kid
That's
in
interesting.
a university full of middle class kids.
Yeah, yeah.
So I identified with other middle class kids. Oh, sorry, working class
Working
kids.
class
But
kids.
I didn't really register that actually I was wildly different from them as well, because I've been in care and they had families.
Yeah.
But my university, I would say my university, I was saying to them the other day, for me, university was the perfect leaving care experience. It was like Disneyland for teenagers. All you had to do is write a few essays now and again for just an exam. It was, I loved it. It was just,
And what were you doing the rest of the time?
well,
in
I wasn't.
Disneyland?
It's a family share.
I wasn't being particularly wild. I mean, the wildest thing my friend Chris and I would do is I used to kind of work in the evening, and then we go to the pub at 10:30 for like last orders.
Yeah.
And that was, and we actually ran a charity voluntary thing called SASAF, which was the South African Student Scholarship Appeal Fund, making cheese toasties and selling cups of tea in the evening. So I was not wild at all, but compared to my background,
No, I get it.
the opportunities, it's just lovely.
I get it.
Yeah.
Your work around the history of care leavers, and you were talking about, and it was really helpful, so thank you for explaining that. I know you're interested in the Coram Museum as well, aren't you? The work of Thomas Coram, because that's a whole other story, isn't it? And that's right here in London as well, I think.
Absolutely,
Was Thomas Coram the first? Was he the first person to set up a children's home? Or
he was the first person to set up something on that scale in this country.
Yeah.
There were others, and there's certainly others in other countries. There have been foundling hospitals and in all
They
over
were called
Europe, for
foundlings,
example.
weren't they?
Yeah.
What does that
That's
mean?
what the founding.
What
that
is
was
a
what it's called,
foundling?
Well, it's I wouldn't know precisely what it encompasses, but it's literally a reference to children originally who were found. One of the things that motivated Coram was seeing literally abandoned babies.
Because, and this is what I was led to believe, that it was women who were working as servants in houses were being impregnated by the master of the house. Obviously, as soon as
Are you serious?
and as soon as the master found out that the chambermaid was pregnant, she was thrown out onto the street.
Yeah, there'll be cases like that. There'll be all sorts of reasons why children.
And then in Coram, they have this amazing thing where they would where the mothers could leave something for the babies.
That's right. It's
That's
a token
in the museum, isn't it? That's
man,
right.
some of them are just heartbreaking.
And they'd often break the token in two,
Yeah,
so that they could come back and claim their child later on,
yeah,
and prove that it was their child.
yeah.
And
And
are there stories of families being reunited around that sort of thing?
There are, yeah. Sometimes it did happen. I mean, obviously, sometimes the mothers didn't return, but sometimes they did, and they'd reclaim their.
And then Handel would come in and play. What was that? What's his famous one?
Messiah?
What's his big hit?
Messiah was a big hit. Yeah, Messiah
at number
that was
one.
in the charts for a while,
And
Messiah.
there was
yeah.
also this thing I read, which I thought was fascinating. That it was actually the Coram thing was actually one of the first art galleries, because he would invite the rich in on a Sunday afternoon.
His mate was Hogarth, wasn't
To have tea.
Yeah.
And he would put paintings on the wall from Hogarth.
he? Yeah,
or-
William Hogarth was
Hogarth
one of
was
his
one
big
of his-
sponsors,
Yeah,
wasn't
he
he?
would get
Big,
paintings in.
yeah.
So, in fact, it was one of the first ever art galleries, because people could look at paintings.
But I think it is interesting, though, that when you think about, even today, if you were fast forward something like Comic Relief, where you've got, which is spearheaded by, Lenny Henry and the work that he's done, it was really interesting to me to think about the Coram Museum and think about the fact that Thomas Coram's sponsors were people from the arts. I think that's quite interesting, because it was William Hogarth and, as we said, Frederick Handel, wasn't they, with the big sponsors.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Tell us a little bit about your current work as well, because you chair the Care Leavers Association, which I have to say I didn't know there was such a thing. So I'm super interested about that. What work do you do? What's the aim of it? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it grew out of. It's about 24 years old. It was founded in 2000, so we've been around a while, and it has evolved. The interesting bit about its history is that the NAPIC, which was around in the 1980s, they had kind of an age limit. At the age of 25, you had to leave, because it was about young people, care leavers, and so forth. And they wanted to keep their focus. And a lot of people who'd been involved who were over 25 wanted to keep active. So I was around in the early discussions, and it was about forming an organisation that represented care leavers of all ages. And that's kind of what we've done. So all of our trustees have been in care. Almost all of our staff have been in care, and we simply try to do things to improve the current care system, maybe by lobbying and helping campaign and so forth, and help older care leavers with things that either they tell us they'd like help with or that they'd like us to campaign on. So one of our big issues, and it has been for about 20 years, is people wanting to access their care files.
Wow.
This is a big subject, yeah.
Yeah, because we'll all have care files on us.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes people, for a long time, people didn't know they had files. I mean, when I was in care, I didn't know there was a file on me.
Yeah.
I only found out when in my late 20s, I think.
Right. Okay.
So, and a lot of people, when they go back, they find if they're older files, they may have been destroyed. There's a lot more information about file access now, and people know the process a lot more. But we one of the things we do is give advice to people, and we also are involved in different groups who campaign around the issues of things like redaction. So if you get a file now, a lot of it can be
Redacted. Yeah.
redacted.
How did you access your files? Was that problematic for you, or was it a smooth operation? Would say.
It's a good illustration of the issues. When I first accessed it, it was 1988, and I only knew it existed because there was an article in Who Cares magazine, which you might remember from way back then, which was for kids in care and care leavers. And I just read an article, and it told me that I could get my file. So I went to social services and I said, "Look, can I have it?" And the guy said, "Well, we can't give you the file, but you can take loads of notes from it if you want." So he made some notes for me, nice man, and he said, "I'll leave the file here, I'll come back in an hour." So I was furiously writing stuff down. And then later on, this is about 10 years later, I discovered I could get a copy of the file.
Yeah.
So I went back, I said, "Look, I've only got 10 pages. And the guy, it was a middle manager in Wirral Social Services, he said, "Tell me what you want, identify the pages, I'll photocopy them and put them in the post to you," which is what he did. And they did do redaction back then, but literally it was with a Tipex, So you can't go mad with a Tipex because you'll be there all day. So we just Tipex out the names, whereas some of the redaction you get now is can be a lot bigger.
Did reading your files, how did that affect you?
For me, it was a really positive thing. I
Right.
mean, some people have traumatic experiences
Yes.
with what they find out.
Yeah.
But most of the things in there I knew already
Right.
because I knew
But
why I
didn't
was
it?
in care.
Sorry to interrupt, but didn't it take you back there? That's what happened to me. I was suddenly plunged
Have you
back
had
in.
your? Have you had
Yeah,
your
I've done mine, and it plunged me back into the hell that was my foster mother.
Yeah, well, I've always had a very kind of detached view of it,
Right.
which is quite helpful in many ways.
Very.
I found out things about my mother which were really helpful.
Right.
For one thing, I found out the effort she made to keep in touch with my brother and I.
Oh, that's very powerful.
Yeah, which I hadn't really understood at all.
Yeah.
We did see her occasionally in care, but I didn't realise from the hospital point of view how much she tried to keep in contact with us. So that was a lovely thing to find out.
Yeah. Did you visit her in the hospital, by the way, when you were?
Occasionally,
Yeah.
quite rarely.
Right.
Yeah.
Was that
but
weird for you? Because my mother was in hospital, and it was weird for me.
It was weird because I didn't feel I had much relationship with her. So it was kind of
Did
felt
you sit there thinking, "I'm meant to love you, you're my mother"? This is what happened to me. I used to sit there and think, "I'm meant to love you, you're my mother," but I don't feel anything.
I did, yeah. Well, similarly, in the sense that I didn't really feel much. So
Yeah.
it was like visiting a distant relative
Yeah.
that you felt that you should visit.
Yeah, you got it.
But then the sad thing was she died when I was 17.
Yeah.
My brother was 18, and I think after I'd left care, when I could have done, I would have made a bit more effort to,
Yeah.
but by then it was too late
Yeah.
to reconnect.
Just talking, Jim, about the accessing files, because you've got a story that Paolo's talking about where he was obviously triggered by what he read and re-traumatized. I have to tell you, when I read my file, I'm still traumatized by it.
Right.
But I was the one thing I'm really grateful to the lady who's helped me. She was the head of the Catholic Crusaders, it was then. When I went to see her, she said to me, I'm going to give you the file, which, by the way, is massively redacted, not with Tipex either, irritatingly. But she said, I'm going to sit with you while you read it. And I went, it's all right. I'm good. So she went, no, I'm going to sit with you. And I went, no, I'm good. You just, you go and do what you got to do. I can just get me a cup of tea. Feel like I'm a grown up. I can read. She went, I read your file before you did. I'm staying. And I went, oh, suit yourself. I opened the file. I was 2 pages in, not even 2 pages, 1 page in. I just broke down in tears. I was just devastated. I to see it in print, this green pen that my mother signed this thing, and there were these sort of statements. You know, there's one of the statements in there is, it says, it was the most bizarre story. So you're reading this documented. Mother came in. She talked about Stephen, who is this brother that I have who I've never met. And it's been arranged that Stephen will go back to her and Paul will be taken into care, providing he's baptised and done this bits and pieces. I'm reading this thinking,
Wow.
I was swapped. And so now I'm kind of, all this stuff's coming.
Yeah.
And then there's this extraordinary statement in it. It says, doesn't look coloured but is. And then it says, ellipsis, therefore unsuitable for adoption, full stop.
God.
And you read things like on a page and you just go,
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
I don't even know what I'm going to do with that. And so my question is, and you've had a better experience, which I'm thrilled about, people that may be watching this and engaging with this may want to go nowhere near their files anymore. But how do you help people? Because I was traumatized by doing it, but I'm glad I did because it's helped me piece together my story. Because I'm a ghost. I don't know where I come from. Do you have any guidance around that?
Well, funny enough, what the Care Leave Association has currently got it's called the Connected Project, and part of it is about helping people deal with their files.
I think that's important.
But we tend, I mean, I suppose the advice we give is, in a sense, is quite simple, really. It's just make sure you've got somebody to talk to about it if you need to, and it doesn't need to be a professional. It could be a friend or relative or whatever. You don't need to, even if you get your file, you don't need to read it. You can shove it in a cupboard for a while. There are positives and negatives, but just prepare yourself for the possibility that it could be either, or even both. But it is difficult because, I mean, obviously you had somebody with you, but a lot of people, when they get their files, they don't have anybody with them. There aren't the support systems available for people when they get their file. There's a bit more now for younger care leavers, but yeah, you can. And I suppose in terms of advice as well. Yeah, we've done a video on this actually in the CLA, and I tend to emphasise the positives, and one of the other people in the video, Sam, he talks about be aware that you've got to be ready for this. So just think about what you might discover.
Absolutely.
Just prepare yourself mentally, and it may be you get a pleasant surprise, but
Who knows?
Jim, do you have a sense of pride at your achievements?
No.
Okay. Because you've done something a lot of people haven't.
Yeah, but I thought about this a lot in the last few years about my journey, and I think, I'm not saying I don't have pride in some of the decisions I made, but they're to do with like personal choices. But the actual journey itself, if I could probably sit here for 2 hours and tell you all the points at which I was lucky on that journey, and by the end of it, you'd either be bored, rigid, or asleep, because there were so many points from the age of about 16 onwards when things could have gone a different way, and they didn't.
Right.
It's really interesting. Can I ask you, I know we've got to close up our time together, it's just whizzed by, but a quick question from me and Paula, maybe you got a closing question you want to ask, but if you were giving advice to your younger self, who was just going into the care system, what would you say?
Ooh. It's very difficult. I don't know what I would say. I think I'd probably, knowing me as I was then, I'd probably say try not to be so scared of everything.
Right.
But that's great advice.
Yeah.
And I know you weren't expecting the question, so thank you for being candid with it. And it's such an interesting thing you said, because when I went into the orphanage, I went from a foster home, which is where Paolo and I are friends because of our shared connection with my adopted brother. The day I went to the orphanage, I was so terrified. I cannot even begin to tell you how terrified I was of that. And if somebody would have just said that to me, don't be scared, I think that might have helped me a great deal, because I was absolutely, literally petrified. Tana, last question for Jim.
Last question for Jim. Do you think the care system has changed for the better?
I do, yeah.
That's good.
So do I.
I mean, I feel I'm tentative with that because I'm slightly removed from it. Other people know far more about what goes on now than I do. But well, you'll know all about the abuse scandals that were revealed in the 1990s, Waterhouse and Pindown and the rest of it. It's not that abuse doesn't go on. I'm pretty certain it does, because human nature being what it is. But I think it would be quite difficult to keep that level of abuse undercover for so long.
Yeah.
And for it to be as widespread as it was.
Yeah.
Really, for sure.
And I think, I'm not saying foster care is the solution for all children, but the shift to foster care, I think on the whole, is
those children's homes now are kind of becoming extinct. When I was in, we had 25 kids, 3 staff, and they're now becoming extinct, I would have thought.
Yeah, although, I mean, I think there is an argument to be made for children's homes, so I don't want to kind of dismiss them. I think actually we may have gone too far. For example,
right.
Some children actually prefer to be in children's homes rather than foster care.
Me, yeah.
I've been in both. Yeah, well, children's, it's got its pros and cons.
Are you going for the children's home or foster care?
That's a very good question.
It's 2-0 to the children's homes at the moment.
It's a very good question. That's not for another day. Dr. Jim Goddard, it's been a privilege to talk to you.
Yeah,
how can people stay in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Oh gosh, well, really through the Care Leavers Association. Great. They can look me up on there. And we all tend to have the same email address. Like mine is jim.goddard@careleavers.com. So it's quite straightforward, and all the staff will have their own.
Yeah.
Very good.
Through the Care Leavers Association.
Very good. Well, we'll put your details on. I'll post it on the podcast. But can I say, if I had to choose someone to be our first guest, it would absolutely have been you. So thank you so much.
Brilliant.
To think of someone who's like a father of the care system, it's just beautiful.
Well, thank you too, because it's been such a lovely experience, particularly talking to 2 people who've been in the care system.
Well, you know what? Do you remember the thing that you arranged at Euston where I came and did the reading?
Yeah.
That discussion afterwards, when all of us had been in care, there was 10 of us, and you could just share because you knew and they. That's what I mean about the psychic thing.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a psychic thing between us all,
yeah.
And you can just, and it was just fascinating. There was a lawyer there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, she's so high flying. She's going, every day I go into the office, I have imposter syndrome. I think they're going to find me out. And I thought, God, exactly. And I was like, that's what I feel like. That's how we all were. And I think that's one of the strengths of this podcast. Is going to be great to to get all that stuff out in the open.
Amazing.
Yeah, you're right. That shared understanding, it's priceless.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is.
Priceless.
Thank you so much. Paolo, thank you.
No,
there you
go.
Wonderful. You have been listening, watching, but we all shine on. So if you're from the care system, or even if you're not, shine. See you next time. Bye-bye.